Before the sun rose over Sycamore Hollow, a 9-year-old girl was already carrying the weight of something every adult in the valley had given up on. Wren Calloway pushed a battered green wheelbarrow down County Road 12, her rubber boots 2 sizes too large, slipping in the cold gravel as the load grew heavier with every stop. Behind barns and beside broken fence posts, she gathered abandoned compost, black, sour, half-rotted piles the farmers had declared useless months ago. From kitchen windows, men pointed. Wives laughed. By breakfast, the whole hollow was talking about the little girl collecting garbage before school. But Wren did not stop to explain. She crouched beside each pile, pressed the dark material between her fingers, smelled it, studied it, and loaded it carefully, as if she were rescuing something no one else could see. Her small hands were red from the cold, her boots were caked with mud, and the wheelbarrow handles cut into her palms. Yet her face carried the calm focus of someone following a clue. Even her father, Dale, watched her cross the farmyard and said nothing. He assumed it was another strange childhood project that would disappear by winter. What none of them understood was that Wren was not simply collecting what they had thrown away. She was testing a question the grown-ups had stopped asking. What if this material was not ruined? What if it had only been abandoned before it could become valuable? Soon, that question would humble the whole valley. But the real danger was not in the wheelbarrow. It was buried beneath the Calloway farm where the soil had been failing for years. The family's 60 acres had once carried corn and soybeans with dependable strength. But for 3 straight seasons, the harvest slipped. Dale Calloway watched yields fall nearly 18 bushels per acre below the county average, then did what most farmers under pressure would do. He bought more fertilizer, burned more fuel, and worked the fields harder. Nothing changed. The corn stayed weak. The soybeans formed poor nodules. Rain struck the ground and ran away instead of soaking in. By late summer, County Extension Agent Sandra Pruitt walked the rows, pressed earth in her palm, and gave Dale an answer he feared. Years of tillage and synthetic inputs had stripped away organic matter, compacted the soil, and weakened microbial life beneath his boots. The farm was not starving for more chemicals. It was losing the living system that made crops possible. Dale understood her warning, but understanding did not stop the bills. The bank still expected payment. Seed had to be ordered. Diesel prices kept climbing. Every season came with a deadline, and slow restoration offered no guarantee before the next one arrived. So Dale kept reaching for quick solutions, not because he was careless, but because survival rarely gives a farmer the luxury of patience. That made Wren's wheelbarrow important. While the adults were trying to save the next harvest, she had begun looking for a way to save the ground itself. But the clue that could change the Calloway farm was not hidden in a textbook. It was breathing quietly behind Earl's barn. Wren found her grandfather turning a compost pile that looked nothing like the sour heaps abandoned along the road. His was dark, loose, and crumbly, with the clean scent of forest soil after rain. Earthworms moved through the lower layers, and white fungal threads stitched the material together like a living web. Wren knelt beside it, pressed a handful between her fingers, and asked what made one pile thrive while another seemed dead. Earl did not hand her a perfect answer. He gave her the pieces. Dry leaves and straw supplied carbon. Fresh grass, food scraps, and manure supplied nitrogen. Moisture kept the microbes working, but too much water drowned out the air. A pile had to be turned, balanced, and given time to breathe. Then he pointed toward the black, foul material near a neighboring fence. "Most people quit before it finishes," he said. That sentence stayed with Wren. The ruined piles around Sycamore Hollow were not proof that compost failed. They were proof that people often abandoned a process before nature had completed it. Earl had shown her that waste was not always waste. Sometimes it was simply transformation interrupted. He would not solve the mystery for her, but he had given her enough to begin asking the question that mattered. Could the valley's discarded piles be brought back to life? But the moment that would decide whether Wren's idea deserved belief came when everything she planted began to die. She spread the collected material across a narrow spinach bed beside the kitchen garden, pressed the seedlings into the dark soil, and waited for proof that she had seen what everyone else had missed. Instead, the leaves turned pale. Their edges curled inward. Within days, the plants sagged as if the ground itself were rejecting them. Wren stood over the bed in silence, hearing every laugh from the road again. For the first time, she wondered whether the neighbors had been right, whether she had dragged home nothing but ruined waste and mistaken hope for knowledge. She could have pulled the seedlings, covered the bed, and pretended the experiment had never happened. Instead, she opened her notebook. She recorded the yellow leaves, the sour smell, the warmth still rising from the soil, and the exact day the damage appeared. Then she carried a sample to Earl and returned to the county library. For 2 evenings, she traced diagrams of compost piles, copied temperature ranges, and underlined one warning: unfinished material can injure young roots. What she learned changed the experiment. The compost was not dead. It was unfinished. Microbes were still breaking it down, generating heat, releasing ammonia, and using nitrogen that spinach needed to survive. Her idea had not been entirely wrong, but her timing had been. Wren wrote that down too. She learned that real discovery does not come from defending a mistake. It comes from measuring it honestly, understanding why it failed, and changing course before pride turns one bad result into permanent defeat. The neighbors had seen failure. Wren had found instructions. But correcting the mistake was only the beginning. The real test was whether Wren could stay disciplined long enough to turn failure into living soil. Behind the barn, she rebuilt the discarded material into long windrows, layering wet chicken waste and fresh scraps with dry leaves gathered from roadside ditches. She added a bucket of finished compost from Earl's pile to seed the heap with active microbes, then watered each section until it felt like a wrung-out sponge. The work was slow and heavy. A cold wind cut through her coat. Mud clung to her oversized boots, and each turn of the pitchfork demanded more strength than her small arms seemed able to give. Still, she returned every morning. When one section became soggy, she mixed in more leaves. When another dried too quickly, she added water. She pushed an old kitchen thermometer deep into the center and wrote every reading in her notebook. On the 3rd day, the pile reached 128 degrees Fahrenheit. Wren turned it again. By the 6th day, the center climbed to 141. Steam lifted into the freezing air, and for the first time she could see that the biology was working. Yet she did not celebrate too soon. She kept checking moisture, recording temperatures, and rebuilding weak sections whenever the heat fell. The neighbors saw only a child wrestling with rotten material through November cold. They did not see the pattern forming in her notebook, or the patience behind every correction. What looked like luck from a distance was actually repetition, measurement, and work. Wren was no longer hoping the waste would change. She was learning exactly how to help it finish what nature had already begun. Each cold morning, the pile answered her effort with one more unmistakable sign. But the proof that could silence every laugh in Sycamore Hollow would not come from Wren's hope. It would come from numbers no one could dismiss. By February, the windrows had become dark, crumbly, and sweet-smelling, with white fungal threads and earthworms working through the lower layers. Wren spread 3 inches of finished compost across a clearly marked test plot beside the kitchen garden, then planted tomatoes, beans, and 2 short rows of corn. To make the comparison fair, she used corn from the same seed bag Deo planted in the main field, sowed it within the same week, and measured the plot before the first row went into the ground. She recorded rainfall, planting dates, soil moisture, plant height, leaf color, and every visible sign of stress. At first, the difference was subtle. Then June arrived. The tomatoes in Wren's bed turned a deep green, the bean vines thickened, and the corn stood straighter with broader leaves than the plants across the fence. When she carefully exposed one tomato root system, the roots were dense, white, and reaching far beyond the narrow pattern she had seen in untreated soil. Sandra Pruitt returned in July and examined both plots. She found better aggregation, more open pore space, and moisture held deeper beneath the surface. The compost was not forcing growth with a quick chemical surge. It was rebuilding the structure that allowed air, water, microbes, and nutrients to work together. At harvest, Sandra weighed the corn and counted kernel density. Wren's test rows produced nearly 28% more than the field average. That number changed everything. The result was no longer a charming story about a determined child. It was evidence. Same seed, similar timing, measured conditions. A result anyone could inspect. Her notebook showed the full chain from damaged soil to restored harvest, giving the neighbors a process they could question, repeat, and verify. Wren had not asked the valley to believe in her. She had built a test strong enough to make belief unnecessary. But the harvest changed more than the field. The next thing Wren restored was the way Sycamore Hollow saw her. One by one, the neighbors who had laughed at the wheelbarrow came to the edge of the test plot and stood in silence. Denny Garner studied the dark soil, the heavy ears of corn, and the pages of measurements in Wren's notebook. Dale watched them, then looked at his daughter with pride he had not known how to show before. He understood that she had not simply fed a few plants. She had rebuilt the living system beneath them. The change did not turn Wren into a celebrity, and she never acted like one. Instead, 3 farmers asked her to walk their fields and explain how she had balanced the piles, tracked the heat, and tested the results. Sandra Pruitt invited her to speak at the county extension meeting, where Wren placed her notebook on the table and showed every failure beside every improvement. That honesty mattered. Soon, small compost rows began appearing behind barns across the hollow. Farmers started saving leaves, separating the manure, checking moisture, and comparing treated soil with untreated rows. Not every pile worked perfectly, but now mistakes were recorded instead of buried.
Wren's experiment became a shared method, and her notebook became the first rough guide for a local soil restoration effort. What the community had once called garbage was now helping damaged ground hold water, support roots, and produce again. Respect did not arrive with applause. It arrived quietly through imitation. The valley slowly changed because one child proved that patient knowledge could give discarded things a second life. But the greatest transformation in Sycamore Hollow was never measured in bushels. It was measured in what people finally learned to see. Wren had proven that soil was not an empty surface waiting to be forced into production. It was a living system filled with roots, fungi, microbes, air, water, and relationships that had to be fed before they could feed anything else. The tomatoes, beans, and corn were only the visible evidence. The real harvest was curiosity replacing assumption, patience replacing haste, and respect replacing laughter. What the farmers had called waste had simply been unfinished. Given time, balance, pressure, and care, it became something capable of restoring life. And perhaps people are not so different. A failed idea may only need correction. A forgotten dream may only need another season. Someone dismissed as inexperienced may simply be growing where no one else can see. The deepest roots form in darkness, long before the field gives any sign of what is coming. So when life appears stalled, do not confuse invisible progress with failure. Keep learning. Keep tending what matters. Keep believing that transformation may already be underway beneath the surface. What part of Wren's story stayed with you most? Share it in the comments and tell us what others may have given up on too soon. Subscribe to Solace Farm Stories for more unforgettable stories of courage, wisdom, and second chances growing from the land. Your answer may help someone begin again now.